So I think you all heard that. But again, definitely feel free to reach out if you're not comfortable with that. All right, cool. Just looking at the chat. Awesome. So we'll get started. Just get rid of this. Great. So just to start, I'm going to go over the agenda that we're going to follow today, just a rough little idea of the things that we're going to be going over. So before I really dive in, I definitely do want to say that some of these topics can and will be heavy. They might be emotionally draining. It might be kind of a lot. So definitely please take care of yourself during this presentation. It's our highest priority as a department that you all have the information in a way that's going to be useful to you, in a way that's going to serve you in the future. And so with that, the most important thing is that you feel safe and you feel comfortable while you're receiving it. So of course, this is a Zoom webinar. Definitely do what you need to do if you need to do it. So some of the topics that we'll be talking about today are, we did our TDVAM announcement, can never say that enough. And we're going to be talking about, in general, bad communication or unhealthy communication. And those might be things that you hear a lot, and maybe you know what that can look like, maybe you don't. So we'll be talking about some different types of bad communication or unhealthy communication, and also some different styles, some different ways that people might go about doing those things. We'll be talking specifically about unhealthy communication when it comes to conflict resolution. That's a really big place where communication is super important and where unhealthy communication can be really harmful. And we'll also be talking about specifically abusive communication and coercion. I think a lot of times people tend to think, often rightfully so, that communication is key, right? It's super important in a healthy relationship to have lots of open communication. But there are times where communication itself can actually also be harmful. Words that we say to each other, actions that we communicate, that also can be used to harm other people. And so we definitely want to make sure that we're going over that as well. And of course, we'll wrap up with some resources and how to get help if necessary. All right. So starting here, what can bad communication look like? And I've said this before, right? Like, bad communication may be kind of a vague phrase. Maybe some of you have some things in mind, maybe not. And if we're looking at this small list here on the left, each of these things in and of themselves isn't necessarily an abusive behavior or something that means that the relationship must end. And I see Chris has his hand raised. So yes, Chris, definitely jump in.
Yeah, sorry, I turned off my video like a dummy. So it's just going to be a picture of my dog moving forward. But B, I don't know about anyone else, but I am only seeing the front page of your webinar right now.
Oh,
Annie,
weird.
what are you seeing? Okay, there it just changed.
Okay. Huh. Yeah, because I'm looking at my portion of like the screen share part and it says it's on the right one, but that's interesting. Definitely, yeah, let me know if that happens again.
Will do.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, everybody. But this is the first kind of main info slide, so we should be all good. All right, well, we'll keep going and fingers crossed it stays good. So again, looking at these different types of communication that could be unhealthy or bad communication, each of these things in and of themselves may not be a behavior that's necessarily abusive or something that must necessarily end the relationship if it happens once, right? And also, while there are a lot of different types of bad communication, there's also good communication. And that good communication can be used to talk through a lot of these unhealthy patterns and hopefully resolve them. And I'm not going to get too much into that because Annie's going to be talking about good communication next week, which hopefully you all will also be tuning into. But to go over these are examples of communication that can be unhealthy. So if we're looking at first, maybe dishonesty, for example, that's pretty straightforward, but it can look like one or both partners not being fully honest with each other. They're hiding things, they're telling lies, they're being purposefully untruthful and knowing that it will harm the other person. And now another thing that's really, really important about honesty, when we're talking about communication and honesty or dishonesty, is A, that of course both partners should be honest with each other, but also that if you don't feel comfortable being honest in your relationship, if you feel afraid of what might happen if you do say how you truly feel, if you tell the truth about something that happened, if you fear how your partner will react to that, that could also be very unhealthy. Fear has no place in a relationship. So when we're talking about honesty, we're of course talking about being open and honest and genuine with your partner, but also about not feeling afraid of what might happen if you are. Unkind, that's pretty straightforward as well. I think we all learned the golden rule in kindergarten, right? Treat yourself or treat others how you would want to be treated. So using kind words, treating the other person with respect. And if we're talking about bad communication, that might look like treating the other person with rudeness, maybe taking them for granted, not giving them the basic respect that they deserve. Inconsistency. So I think this one is really interesting because, of course, in any relationship, no two people are ever required to tell each other every single thing all the time. Of course, you always have the right to keep things to yourself, to have your own private information, even in an intimate relationship. But consistency is also really important in communication. And sometimes communication can be unhealthy or bad communication if maybe one day communication really seems to be going one way. Someone's telling you a lot of things. They're communicating in one way that you think that's how they're going to be. And then the next day, it's just totally different. And you don't really know what to expect. And that can turn into kind of a volatile, uncertain environment. Minimizing. So it's never a good idea to minimize your partner or your friend or whoever it is that you might be communicating with. Never a good idea to minimize their concerns. That's usually unhealthy communication. If someone is coming to you with something, maybe it's a concern or an issue or just something that's on their mind, it's really important to validate those things and to make them feel heard and make them feel important. So bad communication can look like that minimizing, not saying, oh, it's not that bad, just get over it. Oh, well, I would just deal with it like this, etc. And that sort of goes with our last one here, judgmental, right? We never want to make people feel judged for their feelings or their issues or whatever it might be that they're trying to communicate with us. So bad communication can sometimes look like that angle of judgment instead of helping them resolve whatever the issue is. Chris and Annie, if you have anything to add, definitely jump in if you want.
So thank you so much, Olivia. I think this is great information. And of course, it brings up a lot of questions that I think can be addressed pretty quickly. One, for some of us who are here, who may be in a healthy relationship, this is very honest and pretty self-explanatory. But it is always good to have some of this basic information about bad communication out there when you're talking with somebody who's kind of learning through communication styles. And really, that's where teens can sit sometimes. Really, that's a lot of what your teen and youth years are, is learning how to communicate. So being able to quickly identify that somebody using dishonesty to hurt somebody else is using bad communication can seem simple, but it is a step that sometimes can take years. So it's really important that that's acknowledged. And then, of course, with things like dishonesty, if you're using dishonest communication, but you're doing it to protect yourself, that is different than what Olivia is describing. If you're inconsistent because the receiver of the information isn't allowing you to be consistent in your messaging, that is different than what Olivia is describing. So there are a lot of scenarios where unkind language, for instance, might be thought of as telling somebody no, but that's not necessarily true. You can say no, you can disagree, and you can do so in a kind way. So there is always a little bit of another side of these, but the honest truth is, if you are engaging in earnest and emotionally forward thinking regarding your communication, this is a really great list to follow with that. And for instance, right now, I'm not going to judge Annie for having a crazy sneezing
I
fit
saw
that
you.
looked like it hurt. Annie, do you got anything on this stuff?
Just to like further emphasize that point, that if somebody is an abuser, then they can perceive their partner like engaging in these unhealthy communications, like Chris was saying and Olivia was saying, dishonesty. It could be, well, you're lying to me without acknowledging that you're afraid of telling the truth, or it could be unkindness or disrespectful language could be perceived as holding boundaries or actually being honest about their feelings and their understanding of the relationship. And same with minimizing, of like, if somebody is, very like having a very volatile reaction to something or a very dramatic reaction to something, and their partner is not acknowledging it to the point that they want it to be acknowledged, even if it is a reaction that doesn't really make sense or that's inappropriate, then that can be perceived as minimizing too. So it is really important to examine like the context when you're looking at this. But of course, like in a normal context of a healthy relationship, these like bad communication things are of course harmful.
Yeah, definitely. I think those are really good points. And something that can be really dangerous about abusers or in abusive relationships is that when those people who are doing the abusing are getting a hold of this type of language of, you're minimizing my feelings, you're not taking me seriously, I feel like you're not being kind to me because you're not agreeing with me, or because you're saying no, or you're not moving your boundary for me, right? When they can get a hold of that language, that can become really dangerous, because to an empathetic, kind person who is also being controlled, that can be really, really hard to get out of. So I think those are really good points. All right, we'll move on to the next one now. If there are any questions, definitely use the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on it, but I know I have 4 more eyes on it too. All right. So we've talked about some different types of bad communication or unhealthy communication. And I think it's also really interesting and really important to look at some of the different styles that can take. So we're all human beings, and every human being wants their needs met. That is a very universal human need, and it's something that we all share. And there are different styles of doing this, and some are definitely healthier than others. Ideally, we all want to be direct, we all want to be clear, and we all want to be kind in doing that. We want to be assertive. We want to make our needs known and clear, but also respect the other person. And I know Annie will probably talk about that a lot next week, so I won't give too many spoilers there. But if we're looking at styles that could be perceived as a bit unhealthier, also, sorry, can people see? I just want to make sure that when I changed slides, it worked before I keep going. Okay, great. Didn't want to be like all the way done with it and then have none of you be able to see. So if we're looking at these different styles, we might talk about passive communication. This is when, if you're being passive, if you're using a passive communication style with another person, essentially the end result of this is that their needs end up getting met and yours don't. You're not fully saying what you need. You're not fully expressing what you want and what your boundaries are. And it is really, really important to be assertive, to be clear, to be direct, and to let people know what your needs are and what your boundaries are, of course, while being kind. And passive definitely disrupts this. However, I think in a similar vein to what Annie and Chris have been talking about, that's really important, is that sometimes that passivity is the safest option. If you are in a relationship where the other person is abusive, where you are worried about what they might do if you do stand up for yourself and if you do hold your boundaries, then that passivity is definitely the safest option in that situation. And I think it's really important not to blame people for being passive in those situations, or to blame people for not standing up for themselves more in the face of abuse, or for not holding their boundaries more, because it can be absolutely terrifying and even impossible seeming in those situations. So I think that that's a really important kind of facet of passive communication as well. Passive aggressive, I'm sure that we've all encountered passive aggressive people or had passive aggressive interactions before, and they can be really frustrating. I think oftentimes passive aggressiveness is the thing that tends to frustrate people the most. And this is when, if you're in a passive aggressive encounter with someone and they're being passive aggressive towards you, say, they're not being direct. They're not coming forward directly and saying, this is what I would like, this is what I need, etc. But they are still trying to get their needs met. They're not being totally passive. They're not just letting you dictate what happens. They're still trying to get their needs met. But because they're not being clear and direct, their communication might come off as rude or unclear or confusing, right? If you're using the example of maybe you live with someone and a couple of other people, and one of your people that you live with says something like, well, it just seems like some people haven't really been doing their dishes recently, right? They're clearly upset about something. The dishes aren't getting done, but they're not willing to come forward directly and just say, hey, I would prefer if the kitchen were cleaner. Do you think that we could all have a conversation about this, right? And finally, aggressive. So this one's pretty self-explanatory. This is that I win, you lose mentality. If you're being aggressive, your needs are getting met and the other person's needs are not getting met. And essentially you're bulldozing over their needs. You're not really being very considerate of what their needs might be. The objective in that situation is to win, to get your needs met. And this is pretty clearly a poor communication style because, of course, again, back to that golden rule, we should all be treating everyone else like we want to be treated. So having no regard for the feelings and needs of other people is definitely not an example of good communication. Chris and Annie, anything here? Or should I keep going?
I really liked that point that you brought up, Olivia, about like how sometimes we can victim blame people who are passive in the face of their abusers or abusive people and saying, well, you need to stand up for yourself, or, you know, don't let them push you around, when it's what, like, that might again be the safest option that they have.
Totally.
And so, yeah, it's definitely not that easy. And
Totally.
then also, just to touch on the ways that these communications styles can affect your life, is that, you know, if you're passive, that can like lead to a lot of resentment building up. And same with being passive aggressive, that you're not able to fulfill your needs, and, you know, you might be frustrated that other people don't seem to notice what you need, and other people might seem like they are prioritizing themselves, or that they're selfish, even if you've never like necessarily communicated what your needs are. And there might be kind of an expectation that other people are already aware without that communication. And with aggressive communication styles, you might be pushing people away, you know, and people might feel, you might not know this, people might feel intimidated by you, and they might feel afraid to express their needs.
Yeah, definitely. I like that kind of add-on of how each of these things can actually impact you in your day-to-day life and your relationships. And I think it's also a really, really good point of, I do think that assertiveness and aggressiveness are almost sometimes kind of associated with each other in a way that they shouldn't be. You can absolutely be assertive and express your needs and be communicative without being loud, without being an extrovert, without being super outspoken. You can be all those things, but you can definitely be assertive and be quiet and shy and still ultimately be kind. And I think that oftentimes in our society and in just in, you know, if we're talking about maybe job interviews or other things where the goal is to be the most expressive and to stand up for yourself. And those are all great things. But I agree with you that it can definitely sometimes put unnecessary blame on people who might be holding back a little bit, who might be quieter. And that doesn't make them less effective communicators necessarily. So yeah, I think those are really good points. Chris, I saw you unmuted, but can't see.
Sorry.
No.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of follow up on that in the sense that one thing that I think is important to identify with these styles of bad communication, whether or not you're a teenager or the exact opposite, which, you know, maybe you've had a lot of experience communicating in your lifetime and you feel pretty comfortable with it. We can all fall into these styles of bad communication. And this is something that we have as kind of a preeminent um, moral of our department is that there isn't necessarily moral affiliation with some of these things. So being able to identify your own personal style of communication, mine being sometimes I have an aggressive style of communication, helps you communicate better. Having an aggressive communication style and knowing that's the case doesn't make you necessarily a bad person. Using that to hurt somebody, using that to always enforce your own sense of what should be might verge on that bad person territory, but it's not inherently bad. It's something you can work on. So as we're going through these, if you see something that kind of makes you think, oh, I do a little bit of that, awesome, that's fantastic, because that's an opportunity to improve and become an even better version of yourself for the people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. So while we are talking about that, becoming that person for people around you and interacting with people around you, we're going to talk specifically about conflict resolution. I think this is one of the bigger places where communication comes into play and where a lot of people might kind of first think of communication. So if we're talking about unhealthy conflict in general, if we're talking about healthy conflict, just to do a little bit of a preview, the goal should be to resolve the issue. The goal should be to resolve the issue in a way where both people get their needs met. Maybe both people have to compromise a little bit, but at the end of the day, the goal is let's fix this problem. In unhealthy conflict, and this can come in varying degrees, the goal is to win that conflict. It's to be the one who's right. It's to have the last word. And of course, like Chris was saying, we have all been there. I think we've all been in arguments or disagreements or conflicts where we really want to be right? Like we want to be the one with the last word, with the best point. And of course, totally understandable. I think that's a very natural thing that we've all been through. And again, like Chris said, that does not make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a terrible communicator. But hopefully today, just in addressing some of these things, we'll be able to show how you can take some of these things and even improve your communication from where it is now. So if we're looking at unhealthy conflict resolution, there's a really useful book that I'll actually talk about a little bit at the end called Nonviolent Communication. And one of the things that it talks about primarily is these 4 steps of nonviolent communication. So communication that is healthy, that is has that goal of resolving the issue as opposed to winning. And the 4 steps in that are observing, feeling, needing, and requesting. Ideally, you are observing an action or something that is making you upset. You're expressing your feelings about it clearly, and then you're expressing the need that follows from that with a request, a simple request to that person or of that situation. But these 4 steps are not always super easy to just follow and check off in your everyday life, because we're all really complicated human beings with complicated emotions and needs that we want to get met. So sometimes some of this pattern can fall into a little bit of an unhealthy style. So some of the main ways that can look, statements like, I feel like you are blah, 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 or I feel attacked. At first glance, these might seem like pretty normal statements. I know I've been guilty of saying things like this. I'm sure we all have. It's something I try to work on, but sometimes words just come out and it happens, right? But when we say things to other people like, I feel like you are doing this thing, that's actually not a feeling. That's not a feeling that I have. If I say, Annie, I just feel like you're not really doing your share of the work, that's actually an accusation. That's actually a judgment of Annie. That's me saying, Annie, I don't think you're pulling your weight. Or if I say something like, Annie, I just feel really attacked by what you just said, that's accusing Annie of attacking me with her words or of putting me down in some way. It's not a clearly expressed feelings. And you can see here examples of feelings include sad, angry, disappointed, confused, etc., as I'm sure you're all well aware. But it's a really important shift to go from thinking about saying things like, I feel like you are not doing your share of the work. Maybe I feel frustrated, right? What's the feeling behind that? Or I feel attacked, maybe I feel hurt, right? Those are concrete statements of feelings rather than accusations and judgments of another person. Looking at the need portion of this 4-step pattern, saying things like, I just need things to be done my way, or I just need to not feel uncomfortable in this situation. Again, I think these can be pretty easy traps to fall into sometimes. We all get flustered, we might get frustrated and just say, oh, I just need this to be done like this, right? It can totally happen. But these actually aren't legitimate needs, because at every point, or in everyone's life at some point, you're going to have a situation where things aren't going to be done the way that you would prefer them to be done. You're going to have situations where you're going to feel uncomfortable and you kind of just have to sit in it. And it might not be the greatest feeling, but that's something that is inevitable in all human interaction. Again, some examples of legitimate needs include, I need to be respected. Every single person deserves respect and dignity. Or I need to feel safe. That's another basic human right that we all have, right? And another thing that's really important here is exaggerations. This is one that I think is really important to remember to avoid in communication, because again, like all of these, it can be a really easy trap to fall into or something to forget about that can just kind of slip out during communication. But I think if we're more aware of this, it can actually lead to much, much better communication for all of us. So saying things like, oh, you just always do this one thing and it really annoys me. Or Annie, you just never do the thing that I'm telling you to do, right? That's probably not true. In most situations where you're using those exaggeration statements, it's probably not true that they are always doing that thing or that they literally never do the thing. So beyond it just being factually inaccurate and accusatory, another thing that can happen with these exaggeration statements is that as soon as you put onto another person, you always do this thing or you never do this thing, guaranteed the first thing that they are going to start thinking about when they hear that word always or never is they are going to be going through their mind, they're going to be going through their catalogs of every time that they actually have done that thing or every time that they actually haven't done that thing, right? If you say to someone, you always leave your dishes out, they're going to be going, okay, November 2021, I remember that one time I put the dishes away. Okay, I remember last week. And they're no longer going to be listening to you. They're no longer going to be listening to your needs, and you're not going to get anywhere with resolving that conflict. Christiane, do you have anything else on this side?
Well, I personally am a big fan of of the explanation that, like, you also, if you use you always or you never, you're not as in powerful of a position in your argument, which is true. Like, it's just not a well done argument for the exaggerations. But other than that, no, not much to add on my end.
Yeah, no, you said it beautifully. And I think you especially, got across that if you're approaching a conflict as in like a moral way and saying like you are bad or you are wrong or you are doing all of these things that are driving me crazy, then it's going to immediately put that other person in the defensive, and you've kind of already lost before you started the conflict, because they're going to be sitting there trying to respond. They might even reverse it and say, okay, well, you never do this, or you always do that, or I'm not doing that. And it can really work to intensify emotions and create a more volatile situation or conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Things like saying you are a lazy person because you haven't done your dishes. Right. That's very different from saying, hey, I feel frustrated because it's important to me to live in a clean space. Would you mind doing your dishes, please? Right. Those are two very different things. One of them has that moral judgment attached to it and one of them doesn't. So that's a really good point. All right. Moving on now to our next kind of section of the presentation. We're going to talk about the ways that communication can specifically be abusive. used as a tool for power, control, and coercion. The first way that we're going to look at this is talking about isolation. So this one I think is really good to dwell on and think about, because I think oftentimes when we think about isolation, we think of it as a physical thing, right? If we're thinking about an abusive situation in which the abuser might physically keep their partner in the house, they might physically prevent them from seeing their friends or their family or other people. And these are all super, super serious, very, very real issues that are not to be taken lightly. However, I think it's also really important to acknowledge that that isolation component of abuse can happen in more ways than just the physical. An abuser might not physically keep their partner confined to their house or confined to a space, but they can do other things with their words that can have that same effect. The abuser might purposely sever their partner's relationships with family and friends. They might be expressing that unreasonable distrust in those family or friends or other outside people, saying things like, I don't know if you can trust her. She seems shady. I don't think you should hang out with her anymore. Or I don't like him. I don't think you should be spending time with him. I don't trust him. Right? And these are things that, of course, we all have times where we feel differently about someone than someone else does. That's just the way life is. But this is a very, very intentional way to isolate someone from their outside circle. And of course, in a healthy relationship, we should be supporting our partners' outside relationships. We should be supporting their relationships with their friends, with their family, even if we are not best friends with those people. It doesn't matter because it's not our life at the end of the day. And another part of this isolation piece with communication is that an abusive person might make themselves their partner's only point of reference. So kind of after that piece where they're saying, I don't think you can trust this person. She doesn't seem like she has your best interest in mind. I don't trust him. He's shady. I'm the only one you can trust, right? I'm the only one who's going to tell you the truth. I'm the only one who's going to treat you well. That has this effect of shrinking the person's world, and really that self-referential piece of I'm the only one you can trust, that can be really, really damaging in that abusive relationship. So we can see how isolation can happen through words and through communication, and not even just through that physical piece. Do y'all have anything here? All right.
Well, sorry, I was trying to see if Annie was going to unmute or not. Yeah, it's awkward doing it with no video. I apologize. So yeah, and when talking about the isolation portion, it is important to note, and this isn't really the point of today's webinar, but it is an important kind of penumbra of the issue itself, which is isolation and not having a social or familiar group around a survivor of domestic violence is a really big sign that that individual is probably going to fall back into that relationship. By far, what we see is the best likelihood of success for a survivor of domestic violence is having a strong support system around them. So when communication is used to isolate in this way, it creates a really dangerous situation, which is something that is useful to identify if somebody be it teen or adult, is in a relationship that you're worried about. Watch for that isolation. It's one of the biggest, harshest tools in a toolbox.
Definitely. So I'm also looking at the clock. It looks like we're running a little short on time, so I can kind of go through these last slides a little bit quicker. And then if y'all have things, you can like raise your hand or chat me or anything. Does that work? I don't want to.
Absolutely. Yeah, just run through it. Don't ignore us completely.
Okay, y'all don't even matter. It's fine. Anyway, back to good communication or bad communication. So another way that communication can look abusive is through belittling. And this is pretty straightforward, right? The abuser might put their partner down. They might insult them, call them names. It may not be that blunt also. They might make subtle, so-called subtle comments that indicate some kind of dissatisfaction with something their partner is doing. And that in and of itself is problematic because there shouldn't be that power dynamic in a relationship of, I'm not satisfied with this thing that you're doing, because ideally you should be equal. And like Annie was saying earlier, someone who's using this abusive, belittling communication might make dramatic character judgments of their partner. They might do that thing of, I can't believe you didn't put away this dish. You are lazy and ungrateful and whatever else it might be. Those dramatic moral judgments. Threats and intimidation. This is a really big one. So communication can be used for this. Again, physical threats, physical violence, these are huge, huge, serious issues. But communication can also be something that's very threatening and something that's very intimidating. The abuser might threaten physical violence. And even if there's no physical violence that ever occurs, that threat of violence is just as serious. It is extremely psychologically and emotionally damaging to the survivor and actually has really, really long-lasting impacts. Also, vague or intimidating statements that keep their partner under their control, even if, again, they don't specifically say anything about what it is they're going to do, or they don't even carry through with the action. These are incredibly damaging forms of communication.
To add on to that one really fast,
Yes.
Is that the threats and intimidation, when communicated, don't necessarily have to be verbal. There can also be body language of threats, which is in itself its own form of communication, and especially ones that other people might not notice. Like an abuser can communicate very clearly through like eye contact, or through even just getting up in somebody's face, or by making a gesture that other people wouldn't interpret as anything dangerous, but a survivor would be able to recognize and understand that it is a form of intimidation.
Definitely. And that kind of goes back to that isolation piece, right? If they're their only form of reference, then they're going to know those glances really, really well. And they're not going to have that support system to tell them like, hey, you don't have to, you shouldn't have to be scared of eye contact, right? That kind of thing. So definitely great point. Deflecting responsibility. This is another big one. An abuser might blame their partner for their own mistreatment, right? An abuser might mistreat their partner and then say, well, if you weren't so annoying, if you would just listen to me, if you were, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, putting the blame back on someone else. And consistently make excuses of other kinds for their own abusive behavior. Communication is a tool for manipulation. This is a really huge one too. The abuser might gaslight their partner. I have a whole webinar on gaslighting that I think should be up on our YouTube. If you'd like to check it out, I don't have time to get into it right now. But gaslight or otherwise psychologically manipulate their partner, make them question their reality. They might also use emotional manipulation tactics like guilting in order to gain control of their partner, saying things like, well, if you really loved me, you would do this thing, you would comply. And that's just another mechanism for control. And finally, coercion. This is another really, really big one. The abuser might use these manipulative tactics in order to coerce their partner, to get them to do something against their will. They might use other tactics like verbal pressure, just asking over and over again, insisting over and over again, blatantly disrespecting their partner's no, disrespecting their partner's boundary. They might make degrading comments to or about their partner if they don't comply with what it is that they're demanding. And they also might use purposeful deception to coerce their partner, saying it's going to be one thing and then something else happens. So you can see how none of these really exists in a vacuum. All of these communication tactics can kind of bleed into each other. We have seen isolation, dishonesty, belittling. These all influence all these different types of bad communication. So it looks like we are at time, so I definitely want to respect everyone's time and wrap up here, but not before definitely letting everybody know that you are not alone. If any of the stuff in this presentation brought anything up for you, if you're worried about someone that you know or in immediate need, please do call our support line. And we have it listed here. It's 425-25-ABUSE or 425-252-2873. That's DVS's support line. It's 24/7, free and completely confidential. And lastly, I will also wrap up with just addressing the sources, some of the sources that I used in this presentation. And I believe that's all I have for you. I'll leave this up for a second more in case people want to write it down or anything. But otherwise, I think that's all I got. Chris and Annie, if you have anything you want to add, otherwise people can say things in the chat if they want, or otherwise wrap up.
Well, I'll toss out that thank you so much, Olivia. That was a great conversation. Super useful to talk about communication styles. Secondly, I did message somebody in the chat. So if everybody's there, just check your chat, see if I messaged you. And if so, just reach back out about that. Let's see, we've got, oh, yep, there's Olivia's email down there. All right, wonderful. So congratulations, Taylor, on winning our gift card today. Thank you everyone else for putting in your emails and letting us know you were here. We will be doing a $25 gift card all month long. So every single webinar we'll have one raffled away. So show up in the future. And yeah, if you have any questions, thoughts on the subject, anything along those lines, go ahead and toss them in the chats. We'd love to hear your thoughts on stuff. Next week, we are going to be with Annie as she discusses healthy communication. And then the week after is going to be specific about how to have some of these conversations with the teens in your life. Potentially how to have conversations with other people as well. So that's all I've got. Annie, what you got?
I don't have anything else to add. Again, Olivia, that was an amazing presentation.
Thank you. I think if people are not on our mailing list, that this might be a good time to put that out there. I don't know what the process is for being added to that, but I don't know, would they just send their emails and then we could add them?
Yeah, if you guys want to be on the email list, just let me know. I'll toss you on there. You might already be on there. Oh, Olivia, you've got a request?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. The only book is the middle one, Nonviolent Communication. Also with this font, I couldn't italicize it and it was really bothering me, but should be in italics. That's the English major in me. And the other two are more bigger resources. So New Beginnings is another DV. They do similar kind of curriculum to us. And One Love is a national foundation on, or organization on healthy relationships and all the stuff that we talk about. So definitely check any of this out if you're interested.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend the Nonviolent Communication book. It personally, after reading it, it was really helpful, and it allowed me to re-examine my own ways of communicating with people and to really understand communication in itself in a different light and what motivates people and how we express our needs and how we understand the needs of others. It's a very empathetic book.
Well, we're just going to sit here as y'all kind of do your thing. So if you have any questions or want to chat, don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. And if you haven't had a chance, I cannot recommend Olivia's presentation on gaslighting strongly enough. So go to our YouTube channel, check out that presentation because it's amazing. And I think it was your first presentation, right, Olivia?
It was the first presentation I ever did for DVS.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
small. That's little.
Oh.
I think I'm like pretty sure I did not put it on the YouTube myself. So I hope it's on there. But I think at that point you were still recording things for me and stuff. So I'm not sure if you have it or if it's on there or what, but
It's definitely there somewhere. If it's not on there, we'll try to get it on by next week.
Okay, cool.
I keep trying to share audio just to have some background music, but I can't share screen. I really got to go into that profile and change it up a little bit.
I could make you a host.
Oh, it doesn't really matter now.
I don't know how many. Oh, we have 4 people.
Yeah, we got. Well, Jennifer, if you don't have any questions, we're gonna go ahead and end the webinar. Probably have Olivia just remove you, but we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks for coming. Okay, it's just us.
Did you stop recording?
I think
No, it's still recording.
it records until, doesn't it record until you end the Zoom?
No, you
Well,
can
you
go
can
up
hit
to the top.
record.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Stop recording.